Last month at TIFF, I got to attend the world premiere of Frankenstein, which was one of my most anticipated films going into the back half of the year, with Guillermo del Toro at the helm. From its inception, Frankenstein felt like a movie I was always excited for. I don't read much, but Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one of the few that's truly struck me in the way I've never really felt from literature. And creature films are at a really interesting spot right now, with one of the greatest of all time just last year. I think a new adaptation of The Monster had a lot of potential. With this adaptation, I'm not shy to say it feels like the definitive retelling of Mary Shelley's novel, but I don't know if that's necessarily complimentary. Del Toro tries to do so much. This movie comes in at 2 hours and 30 minutes. Before getting to more of my thoughts on Frankenstein, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the film in the comments down below, and as always, subscribe for more movie reviews. Even with my flaws aside, this is a pretty good adaptation, and I think it all roots from the design of the film, from the sets to the camera work to the score. I think technically Del Toro is one of the best directors working right now, and he brings that to the world of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in a very unique way. Maybe this was just my interpretation of the book. It felt like more of a steady shot film, taking in the landscapes, in the rooms, in the beauty of the time. This film decides to use a lot of wide angles, similar to Knives Out or Superman, less dynamic camera work than those, and more just at the hip, moving in and out. And I think it works. I don't think it works necessarily in personal moments, but in terms of getting the scale of the sets and characters and storytelling, Del Toro does a fantastic job. I expected something very different on a visual level, at least in terms of the composition of the film, and this movie just surprised me completely. I do think, though, that the fatal flaw of this entire adaptation is nowhere near the physical parts of it, but it's more so the writing and thematic ideas that Del Toro was striving for, in that the idea of generational trauma in Mary Shelley's novel is so important. But I think the main reason it works in the novel is because we get so much time with the monster after he's moved on from Victor to an extent. The generational trauma and the fatherhood aspect is what Del Toro tries to lean into so much, and it doesn't really work because the whole first half of this film is so based in Victor Frankenstein's childhood, and I didn't really care about any of that. This film never goes deep enough into the latter aspects of the monster story, so it doesn't make the first 30 minutes of backstory feel essential. There was no selection of story, I guess, and that's where I think Del Toro made the biggest mistake when adapting the novel. And that's not to say I just wanted another movie titled Frankenstein that's only about the monster and very little about the actual doctor and inception of the creation, but the monster is inherently the most interesting part of the story. Maybe this is a very naive way of looking at the story of Frankenstein, but I don't think Victor Frankenstein is necessarily essential to an extent. It's more so about a very mad ego just birthing something that was never meant to be, and that character is forced to live on the earth. I'm not saying that Victor should be completely irrelevant from the thematic ideas, but even Guillermo del Toro has talked about how he wants to craft this version of the monster as a newborn, not necessarily an abomination like other adaptations have. And in that, it focuses so much on Victor's childhood that it doesn't really let us lean into Victor and the monster's dynamic. The way that Guillermo del Toro explains the evolution of the monster in this film is absolutely perfect to me, though, about how he starts as a newborn, not necessarily an abomination of creation, and ends with the film actually making his first decision. Part 2 of the story, which focuses more on the monster, is just easily the most compelling part of the film because it blends together the idea of Victor Frankenstein's ego, but also the existential idea of creation. But none of this comes together to be very emotionally heavy, so in that, I think you can't really compare it to other of Guillermo's work in terms of building a connection between you and the characters. It also focuses so heavily on Victor's story that it's hard to build a connection with the monster himself other than just like really feeling bad for him. It's really interesting because the second half of this film is so focused on the monster, yet I never saw Jacob Elordi in the monster. It really just felt like a creature trying to find his footing and learning the world. Oscar Isaac has the most material to work with, and he does an amazing job. I just don't think his character is very interesting. The film really hits a stride when the dynamic of the doctor, the monster, and Elizabeth are all brought into one. Mia Goth isn't doing some batshit crazy thing like she's done before, but she is really good. One of the most compelling aspects of the novel to me is the monster's life after distancing himself from Victor Frankenstein, and a big part of that is The Bride of Frankenstein, which is mentioned here but not explored enough in my opinion. Though I do think that would have taken far more restructuring to the entire Victor plot. I think it would have made for a very compelling and honestly more detailed look into the monster himself. The film is 2 hours and 30 minutes. Like, they're already going for a lot here. I really think taking the exact structure of the book was this film's biggest downfall, because within all of the storytelling and the characters and the ideas, it is doing exactly what the novel is supposed to do. It gets all of those messages across as well as it possibly can. It's just about what messages it emphasizes. And I think the fact that it's emphasizing the fatherhood aspect so much is just the flaw of the film. From all that I've said about Frankenstein, I don't know if my review sounds more positive or negative, but I really do think this is Guillermo del Toro just doing what he does best. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is such an ambitious novel to adapt, and I think he really goes for a one-for-one adaptation in the good and the bad. Overall, I'm going to give Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein an 8.5 out of 10. If you still want to check out this movie, let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Subscribe for more movie reviews. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.